they didn't really bother with this, you know? So you're pushing a panel into an opinion before the thing actually starts at all. The restricted length is a good thing because it does engage the reader. You know, you've got to engage the reader, and they're saying, okay, this is only so many pages long. If this is good, I'm going to enjoy reading it, and that's a very important thing. Don't make statements that you can't substantiate. Don't make big, bland statements in the document that when it comes to it, you're giving material to the panel to ask you a question, to ask them around this space, and if you can't substantiate it, you're in real trouble. You know, if you make statements, we are the best institution in the country in this area, right? But you've given no backup to show that that's the case, any support of the position made or whatever, you're going to be in real trouble in that situation. And also, don't raise questions and leave them unanswered, because you're only inviting a panel to sort of engage with you around vague things like that. Use examples, use case studies, and also, the most important thing, be reflective in the document. Look at the good and the bad. You know, there will always be things you're good at and other things you're not so good at. We're all not brilliant at everything. So, you know, the panel know that because they're all coming from institutions anyway. They know the reality of this situation. So you've got to get the balance between what's good, what's bad, and make sure that you identify those in a reflective manner within the document. Identify room for improvement. Use plain English. Don't complicate the issue. Just get it out there. Very straightforward. Plenty of illustrations, graphs, tables, if possible. And then you use the European standards and guidelines. There's a lot of information in there to give you indications as to how you might address this. And also, if you can, get somebody who writes well to do the document, to do all of the document. There's nothing worse than one chapter written by person A, chapter 2 written by person B, and then somebody puts it together, and it's quite evident when you start to read it that all of this didn't come from the same place, that it's all put together, and that shows a lack of preparation and a lack of respect, really, for the panel that's going to engage with it. The visit itself, then. Speaking to the presidents, the directors, chief executives, or whatever, after the first introductory session, get out of there. You're not needed after that. Your situation is that you go in, you make your case to the panel, an introductory space, setting the space up for the rest of the visit. If you're on everybody's shoulder right throughout the process, the panel will think, something going on here. They're hiding something. This guy can't leave these people in room on their own for 5 minutes. There's something really wrong here, right? So if you're the president or the CEO or the person, get out of it. You know, introduce yourself, set the scene, and then disappear. They'll call you back if they need you. If there's some areas that they require further clarification on, that's perfect. But don't sit there monitoring the performance of your staff on an ongoing basis, because there's two things that will happen. They won't speak because they're afraid to speak in front of you in case there's a contrary view to what might be expressed somewhere else. And that leaves it that you become the dominant person of the whole process. And then what they're reviewing is one person's performance, not an institutional review at all. So you've got to get that balance right. And I think my advice is do the introductions, then get out of there. Sorry, that sounds a bit, but that's just the way it is. Trust your staff. You know, if you've got people on board and people are well able to do this job, then delegate the responsibility to them. Let them get on with it. They're well able to do a job. I don't know what I've done there. That won't come out. Sorry. How did I do that? I'm standing from a distance like this. Sorry. Also engage with the panel. You know, there's nothing worse than when a panel member asks a question and nothing happens. Or you get a one-word answer. Or you get some, you know, you don't have a level of engagement where there's a comfort within the room that there's an actual conversation happening here and not a question and answer session. So engage with the panel. Don't be shy. You know, sell yourself as best you can. You will run into difficulties because naturally they're going to identify areas where you have problems and need to be addressed. But don't stand off. Don't just, you know, create an atmosphere. That's very difficult because what happens is the chair tries to fill the space then if the flow isn't occurring. And that can be even worse because they'll probably identify areas that you maybe don't want them to go into. So you've got to get the conversation, the flow going, and don't be shy. Avoid conflict. Don't get into head-to-heads with the panel because it's like the comedian with the microphone. He's got the microphone, so you're going to lose out in that situation all the time. So just avoid the conflict. You know, stand up for yourself, make your position, but don't get into any personal agendas with any members of the panel. You always know more than the panel. You know, they're coming to review your institution, or review your documentation, but you have done the institutional review yourself. You know the most about this. You're the people with the real information now. You shouldn't fear any element of this. And then don't make assumptions. Don't assume, well, I'm not answering that because they really should know about that. Don't assume that people know everything about you. You've got to fill the gaps for them. You've got to make up the information. And don't be going out of the room and saying, what kind of idiots are those in the panel that didn't pick up on this or that or the other thing. It might not be obvious from the documentation that they got. So give them the benefit of the doubt. Don't make assumptions. Give them the information they want. And then the outcomes. Just came across this quote from a fellow called Dawson. The legacy of the past is always influencing the emerging future. So, okay, if you take that for granted, whatever way the institutional review process has gone in terms of the preparation, in terms of the engagement with the panel, in terms of the actual performance of your institution, all of that in one way or another will influence the future in terms of how you bring it forward. So if you've made this a very professional, a very enjoyable, a very engaging process, then after it's all over, it's easier to go back to staff and say, look, they've said this, and we'd like to move on and try and develop these in another area. The one thing, don't let it get you down if you think you've done very well in terms of your engagement, in terms of your preparation, etc., and you feel after the 2 days you come out and say, well, that wasn't as difficult as we thought it was going to be. We weren't as challenged as we expected to be. Sometimes there can be a bit of deflation when you're preparing for something like that, and then you go through it and you say, just what was all that about? So you've got to be ready for that sort of, balance of your own emotions in terms of how you move it forward as well. So when it's all over, you've got to focus on the future. There's nothing you can do about what happened in the past. You've got to focus on now, you're going to get certain commendations in terms of your good performance. You're going to recommendations as to how you might improve or what you might look at. So you've got to accept that openly. And I think the important thing is to engage constructively with that process. You might have give out about whoever chaired it or the approach of certain members of the panel or whatever. But, that's eating bread. You've given it your best shot. You've got to get on now and engage with the report that comes out of that. And it will be in the public domain. And you've got to come back with your implementation plan. But don't let that scare you. That's something, if you've done the work properly in the first instance, that shouldn't be an issue. Because you'll be happy with your own documentation that you initially submitted, plus the report, plus the implementation plan. And don't try to engineer a result. Don't try to influence panel members after the fact. You have people trying to do that where, the process is through, there's a report coming out, and then phone calls start coming, Jesus, this isn't really working out the way I wanted it to work out. You've done it. People have come independently to look at your performance. This is their view. Take it on the chin and get on with it. Get on to the next stage. Face up to the findings, even though you may not agree with them. And then I suppose from the private college's perspective, you have a different maybe agenda that you're working towards in terms of your competitive position with each other. And also maybe your international reputation in terms of attracting students from abroad, etc., fee-paying students. You want to make sure that this process reflects very well on what you're doing. And also, the strategy is based very much on the student attraction, getting the students in to make sure to sustain the institutions that you're working in. So that's important from your perspective to make sure that that ethos is determined as well. So when you have a panel coming along looking for your strategic plan, there may be elements of that are quite unique to yourself. So therefore, you've got to put that up front and say, look, this is the way we're doing things, but because there's commercially sensitive material, whatever else it is, you may not want to include it directly in the review report itself. So basically, what I've tried to do is bring you through from start to finish in context of some of the steps that you need to take, but also some of the trapdoors that you can fall down through very easily as well. And I think the most important element is to take a common sense approach to it. Look at it as normal work within the institution. Don't try to say, oh, set it out here, as something separate. And there's a tendency sometimes to take somebody within the institution and say, right, you're in charge of that. If you do that without any support from anywhere else, then that person becomes the institutional review person. And that's the way everybody else sees them. They'll say, oh, institutional review, it's over there, nothing to do with me. So you've got to ensure that there's a sort of team approach to it, and that if you have somebody managing the process or whatever, that they're engaged throughout the institution, they know what's going on, everybody knows what the outcome is and what you're trying to get out of it. So for anybody that hasn't been through it, I wish you the best of luck. For those of you who had, just say congratulations, you've been through it. And again, just thank you very much for the invitation this afternoon. Thank you.